Terrific. All right. I'd like to call the Finance and Administration special meeting of the Board of Directors of Marin Water to order. May I have a roll call, please?
Good morning. Director Larry Russell,
Here.
Director Matt Sampson,
Here.
and Chair Jed Smith.
Here. All right, great. And any public comment on adoption of the agenda?
There are none.
Great. And a roll call and a motion, please.
I'll make a motion. Second.
Okay, thank you. Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson.
Yes.
Chair Smith.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, great. So we are going to adjourn for a closed session of the board. Is there any public comment on the closed session?
There are none.
Okay, hearing none, we're going to go to the TAM conference room and we will come back at approximately 9:30. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. We adjourn the closed session of the Finance and Administration Committee meeting at 9:25 a.m. and there are no reportable actions. Any public comments on non-agenda items, Terry?
There are none.
Okay, great. Welcome, Monty. Okay, great. So we'll move on to the regular items on our agenda and specifically we'll look for approval of the minutes from the June 27th, 2024 meeting. Can I have a motion and a second, please?
So moved.
Second.
Great. Any public comments on the minutes?
There are none.
And a roll call, please.
Director Russell,
Aye.
Director Sampson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Schmidt,
Aye.
and Chair Smith.
Great. Moving on to our next item for B, Vicky and Ben will introduce our human resources update.
Good morning, Chair Smith and directors. This morning, we're part of this kind of co-presentation with HR, and it's my pleasure to introduce the Culture Initiative team. I'm Alex and I, the engineering director and co-chair of this committee. With me this morning, we have Tiffany Freitas, our human resources specialist or technician, who's also a co-chair on this committee, along with Monique Bell, who is a customer service representative, and Jesse Underhill, who is our communication specialist, and Ben Bauer. So we have a presentation. Let me just get this up real quick. From beginning. Okay. Great. Perfect. So, kind of did the first intro slide. So just to kind of go over some of the agenda we'll be going over today, we'll be touching on the background and kind of the need for this committee, that how it formed to really improve employee engagement throughout the organization, and also be introducing the Ripple team to the board. And the Ripple team, and we'll be going over what that means and what the acronym, and then what our mission goal is for this effort that we're doing. And then we'll follow up by just doing a brief, touch on the Gallup survey and going over the 8 different committee goals that we've established for ourselves that we're working on. And then we'll follow everything up with the next steps.
Ben, did you want to say anything about the formation of this committee or initiation here?
Well, I'd say I go to a lot of meetings. I'll just touch on that kind of from a feeling standpoint throughout the week and month. And we've been meeting monthly, and I'm kind of there for support, not active part of the group. And it's my favorite meeting. And you'll get a sense why as we introduce the folks and talk about the initiatives, the energy, everyone's around the table like-minded. And it's really exciting that we're all just talking about the same thing, about how do we make this workplace better? How do we just change the vibe in a way that feels right? And it's very exciting, the energy in the room, and you'll hear we're making progress in a number of initiatives. And yeah, I'm just super, super jazzed at this initiative, how it's forming, how it's moving forward. And it really feels like we have an opportunity to do something significant here that will really potentially fundamentally over time, right? We're in this for the long term, really bend the curve of how we feel about coming to work, how we interact with each other, how we communicate, how we value our staff resources here. And so I'll let the group.
Great.
move on.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and take over this portion. Move that in a little. I've got mics coming in from every direction. Thank you. My name is Tiffany Freitas. I'm the Human Resources Technician here at Marin Water. A bit more, sorry. Normally I have a really loud booming voice, so be grateful. So a little bit of a background about our group. Our team, it's comprised of really a diverse group of individuals that include employees from every division here at the district, as well as incorporating members from management, supervisory, and general personnel work groups, really with the objective of improving employee engagement. I'd like to identify the committee members that were kind enough to participate in this journey with us. So we'll kind of go down. And for those members that are here, as I read out your name, if you could please just raise your hand, I'd appreciate it. So first we have Ben Bauer, who is our superintendent of maintenance. Thank you, Ben. We have Monique Bell, who is a customer service rep. Christina Montanos, who is in our water efficiency department. Cole Younger, who is a construction management inspector. Danielle Graham, who is our senior buyer in purchasing. Jesse Underhill, our specialist in communications and public affairs. Jonathan Fouché, who is a supervisor in our watershed maintenance group. Justin Turnham, who is in our corrosion control and is a technician too there. Mike Sneeg, who's a supervisor in facilities maintenance. Scott Yarl, who is in finance and is one of our technicians there. Teresa O'Hagan, who is a heavy equipment operator in project maintenance. Myself, Tiffany Freitas, Alex Anaya, my co-chair, and of course, Ben Hornstein, who has been championing our cause all along. We thank you very much. Our first meeting was held at the end of April, and since then they have been conducted on a monthly basis.
I have a question. How was the committee assembled?
Really, it started as a brainstorming.
It was a brainstorming session that me and Tiffany, along with, we shared our ideas with Ben to select, diverse members throughout the entire organization to bring in, that input from, the watershed
So
operators.
you guys approached them.
Yes.
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 Yeah, and it was very important that we included everybody from every work group, as well as covering every division. We really wanted everyone to have a voice in this committee.
Thanks.
No problem. So as you can see on the next slide, initially when we started, it was the Culture Initiative group, but really through a process, we had a lot of input and came up with RIPPLE, which, as you can see, the acronym: recognition, inclusion, people first approach, participation, listening, and employee-led initiatives.
What about the union?
Union members. We do have one person that is a union member that I am, well, we have represented and unrepresented, if you're asking that question. But as far as an actual,
I think there are 4 or 5 represented members of your committee, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Most are.
The majority are. So again, the committee name is a reminder of really our purpose and our mission. Our mission statement: to cultivate a people first culture by creating engagement, opportunity, collaboration throughout the organization. And I think that mission statement really encompasses our driving force. Gallup survey. So at our second meeting, this was one of the first things that we addressed. We were presented the results from the Gallup survey. These results were utilized in considering opportunities that we're really going to be implementing in establishing initiatives, and also be used in an ongoing fashion in determining those future initiatives. The HR manager actually is going to talk a little bit more about that next. All right, so committee goals. These were the initiatives that were established right out the gate from our first meeting. Employee retirement, this was something that was really one of our first priorities. Developing leadership development programs, internal employee communications, new employee orientations, employee recognition events, social opportunities, organizational exposure and collaboration, and more. So the first item, of our first initiative that really was our most pressing initiative was employee retirement policy. This was one of the top initiatives that the committee really wanted to implement as soon as possible. This included updating the employee retirement policy, which allows us to establish guidelines for celebration and acknowledgement of those employees that are retiring. We came up with a couple of different ideas as well, one of which is the creation, really the update and creation of a retirement plaque. And I meant to actually bring one with me today to show you, but I apologize, I was rushing in. They're really beautiful and a testament to the gratitude that we have for these people who have dedicated so much of their time and service to the district.
Yeah, in addition to that, also a resolution that could be read out, in public here at the board.
And we were very fortunate because we were able to implement this so quickly. We actually had one of our employees who retired after 31 years of service that we were able to put this into practice for. So.
Okay. One of the other goals that the Ripple team is working at is the leadership development program. So we're currently looking at reviewing the district's existing leadership academy program and working with staff to really revamp it and make it better and make it a good program so that any staff that aspire to become our future supervisors or managers have a pretty clear path and how to get there. So that's kind of one of the things that we're really going to be focusing on, really making that a robust program moving forward so everyone could take advantage of that who so chooses to.
Good morning, directors. Jessie Underhill, communications specialist. So one of the major components of a healthy culture at an organization is really good internal communications, which aligned really well with our communications team work plan, which was to develop a internal newsletter and launch that this year. And so our communications and public affairs manager, Adrian Mertens, came to one of our meetings and led a brainstorm to get input from the committee about what would be, important for employees to see in an internal newsletter and how we want it to feel receiving it. And so we had a really great conversation as a committee around the tone of the newsletter and that we want to inspire pride in the organization and that it can build connection between different work groups to understand, what everybody's working on, put faces to names and build more connection. And another really important piece that came out of that brainstorm was the distribution. We're used to sending out digital newsletters and comms, and we realized that that doesn't reach all of our employees super well because people are out in the field and they're not in front of a computer all day, a big chunk of our staff. And so we had some great conversation about how we could make this a printed piece and a digital piece and have those work together. And we're really excited to distribute that next week. And thanks to all the input from the community or from the committee to make this a special thing that I think will really connect with folks.
New employee orientation. So I specifically asked to address this initiative because this is something that not only am I directly involved in, but it's something that I'm very passionate about. So the new employee orientation, it's going to incorporate multiple work groups such as safety, IT, communication, as well as finance. This is all going to take place in the first day of orientation. And the new onboarding process is actually going to be a 12-month process. So the engagement will stay throughout their first 12 months here and hopefully beyond. So as mentioned, we are definitely reimagining not just what the onboarding process is going to look like, but we've also been fortunate enough to implement or re-implement our facility tours. This was something that we did on a quarterly basis for our new employees. COVID put a little bit of a squash on that for a while. And over the last 4 months, we have been trying to play catch up. And as of this morning, as we were doing an introduction to our folks who are going on a facility tour this morning, it was really good to hear people saying, oh, I've only been here for 6 months so far instead of 3 years or 3.5 years. So we've gotten really great feedback. And again, this is just another way to keep our folks excited and it really engaged and understanding what we do goes beyond just the scope of what's in front of us. So that's very exciting as well.
Good morning, Monique Bell, Customer Service Representative. So this summer, we had a very successful employee appreciation event that was held at Lake Lagunitas by our watershed division, and it was very successful. We had great feedback from that. So we're looking forward to expanding our opportunities for more employee events. Some like the family days, which I would definitely appreciate. I live over in the East Bay and it was my first time over here. So I would love if we can get family and come over and everybody can see our watershed and all the lakes. Absolutely beautiful. I like the idea of having informal or voluntary weekend events, such as hiking and sporting events, mountain bikes, golfing, etc. And try to establish like a modest budget for our department and division lunches and other opportunities as well.
The committee's looking at organizational exposure and collaboration. It's built on an interest of conveyed by staff, interdepartmental exposure and career path development, things like cross-training, job sharing. The committee oversight of new district-wide training programs and development, opportunity to develop new initiatives and expand employee involvement. Those are all things that are important in this venue.
So to kind of wrap things up and, going over the next steps. So this committee is really dedicated to continue working on these goals and executing them and implementing these goals. And then also looking for new opportunities as we start taking some of these or checking some of these off to really help expand, the engagement throughout the organization, which really will be taking Marin Water to the next level as far as its employees and how we engage throughout, day-to-day communications regularly. So we're really excited about that. And this is a great committee and I'm very, very glad to be a part of it. And that's our presentation for today.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Larry, any comments?
Yeah, I'd like to agree with Monique. I thought that was the best event that I've been to in 20 years on the board. So it was the Lagunitas one. It was great. And it was fun.
Mhm.
Monty?
I can get this right. This is so fantastic. I mean, the number of initiatives that you folks are bringing to us is just impressive. And I know that there were elements of these things that already existed. So I know this isn't like, necessarily, going from 0 to 60. So recognition to the work that came before, but to draw so much emphasis to this is really an important, I think it's a really important aspect of the district. I think it's oftentimes the kind of thing that gets lost behind, like, are you delivering water? Is it coming at a cheap cost? Are we making sure that we're, fixing emergency repairs? That all has to happen, but it happens better when there's a culture in the organization that makes people want to come to work. And when they come to work happy, then they do their job better and everything goes better. So I just think this is so great. And it makes me really proud of the district that we've prioritized this as part of being a district that serves our community. And it's such I think, an example to our community that that we're part of the community, that this is how we treat our internal community. And I think it also speaks to how we see our external community that we serve. I love the events. I'm a big fan also of including our families, because behind all of us around us are families that we don't spend time with because we're here at work or whatnot. So like to, bring especially our kids to come and see what it is that we do with the district that we serve, the lands, because understanding water is going to be something that will always serve our kids as they grow up, because it's always going to be an issue. And I really appreciate, particularly Director Russell, I think, and brought up the question of represented staff versus management and others. That is a place where I think there's been historically a divide that I think this type of work helps make us one district, not different pools of interests or employees. And so this is just fantastic work. Thank you for all the effort that's gone into it, and I'm excited to see it keep going forward.
Well, Ben, you and I have been talking about this for over a year, and I think what I love about what has happened here is that you see yourself in a support role, and you've empowered a terrific group of folks, and it's broad, and you guys have absolutely blown me away and far exceeded my expectations in your inclusion and your thought process and what you're seeking to achieve and what you already have achieved. So I am thrilled about the potential and where you already are. Some specific thoughts. I'll second Monty's comment about family days. If that's something that needs funding, I think that's a fantastic way to include people and support you and all the hard work that you're doing. I'll second the idea of the events and the idea of having a small level of a budget for each of the departments, either for lunches or events. I find food is a great way to bring people together. And so, as you said, a modest budget, I think, can go a long way towards, in having happiness. And it could even be cross-functional, or it could be by department. It's nice to have people integrating. I love that you've included career development and leadership in this. That's really thoughtful. That was not top of mind, and what a great way to do it through this committee. And how important is it for us to help people achieve their goals and their dreams, and not just their job and head down right now, but really where do they want to go? I may add to your retirement concept some level of tenured recognition. In our old family company that I've watched my grandfather give recognition to employees that were there for 15 years, and then 20 years, and then 25 years, and 30 years. So when those anniversaries come up, and pick the time, maybe it's 20 or more, it would be great to have them recognized in this room. And we could do that on an annual basis. These people hit 20 years, and I want to see them. I want to say thank you. And then lastly, I love that you went both on retirement and you went on new employee, and that new employee 1 year orientation is great. Will you please have that for board members? Because we really don't have that, right? And all the better. We should see all the facilities. We should see all the things that you're showing the staff. The more in touch we are, the better we'll be able to help serve you all and support you all. So thank you very much. Is there any public comments?
If I could just very briefly, I wanted to expressly thank Alex and Tiffany for their leadership of this committee. We are all, as the board's well aware, quite busy, and you guys have carved out the time to really move this forward. And especially I want to thank all the committee members who are equally as busy and are committing to this process. I just am so appreciative. And lastly, we have been talking about this a long time, and I just want to recognize staff doesn't know everything. And the board did push me to think about carving out time to think about the employees, and recognizing it probably did take that. And I wanted to thank the board for that, because this is the right thing, and it's very opportunistic for the organization. So thank you.
I have a quick comment too. Larger water companies like East Bay Mud, LA Water and Power have frequently pins where they recognize years of service. The cops do it on their sleeve, but I think those kind of things are useful. You know, it's a way they have like little diamonds or little crystals or something in them that, you know, so many years and it's, I think generally well received by the employees to get that recognition.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
There are no public comments.
Okay, great. Thank you, team. That was an item for information purposes only, and we'll move on to 4C. Brett.
There's still Vicky who's going to be providing. Yes.
Thank you. Missed it.
Good morning, board.
Good morning.
For having me. Thank you. Okay, so I'll go over the Gallup survey results with you. Let's see. Have my notes here. So as you know, the district conducted a employee engagement survey. We had 160 respondents for the survey, and we used the Gallup Q12 questions for the survey. Let's see my board. Thank you. Okay, thanks. Thank you. So the 12 questions that were used are featured here under the engagement element section. And those 12 questions measure the 4 elements of employee engagement. And so I'm gonna just share with you Gallup's definition of employee engagement. So according to Gallup, the term employee engagement relates to the level of an employee's commitment and connection to the organization. Gallup defines employee engagement as the involvement and enthusiasm of an employee in both their work and in the workplace. So the questions that they use for their Q12 survey, the data from those responses represent how employees are feeling in the organization, how they're developing in the organization, and how they're thinking about their jobs. So the 4 elements of the pyramid start with the basic needs at the base of the pyramid. And the basic need is, you know, do I have the materials to do my work correctly, to do it right? And do I know what is expected of me? The second element is the individual contribution. What do I give to the organization? And does someone encourage my development, recognize my work, and do I have an opportunity to do what I do best in the organization? And the next level of the pyramid is teamwork. Do I have a best friend at work is one of their questions. But also, do I belong to this organization? Am I tied to the mission? Does my opinion count? Does my opinion count? Excuse me. So that would be the teamwork. And then it moves on to the top element, which is growth. And according to Gallup, is the employer needs to focus on the basic need and then move up the pyramid, right? Okay. And so in thinking about those questions and those basic needs, Gallup takes the data from the results and they put employees into categories, if you will, or they measure categories.
So Gallup asks the questions
Yes, it's a Gallup survey. We did it. It's an online survey.
online.
Yeah.
Okay.
So using those questions, they measure whether or not employee is engaged, not engaged, or actively disengaged. So an engaged employee is someone who's highly motivated. They're innovative, passionate about the work. They're looking at moving the company forward. So kind of like your people on the Ripple team, right? So they're here. Not engaged employees are essentially they're not attached to the work. They're here, they're doing the work, they're getting the work done, but they don't have the passion for it. They're not putting in the extra. And then actively disengaged employees are unhappy at work, and they're resentful because their employee engagement needs are not being met. and they act out their unhappiness at work, and they actively undermine the work of people who are who are actually engaged. Okay, so using that data, Gallup converts the scores into a 1 to 5 rating for the employer. And so in 2016, we conducted this survey, and our score for our Gallup score, our mean was 3.4 out of 5 in 2016. It moved slightly in 2024 to 3.56. The percentage of engaged employees stayed the same, so 28% in 2016, 28% today. In the United States, which this seems like a large number, 50% of the US workforce are not engaged. Our score for this is 48%, so we're slightly below the US average, which I was kind of surprised that 50% are not engaged in the US. And then our actively disengaged employee group is 24%, which is higher than the US average. But it is an improvement from 2016, where our actively disengaged employees, we were at 37%. So it's a 13% improvement in time. Okay. So Gallup provides the results in a number of ways. This is kind of like a heat map, and this shows you how people responded to each question. So the red being the strongly disagreed to the green being strongly agreed. So the red and orange are strongly disagree and disagree. The neutral color is beige, and then the agree and strongly agree are the green colors. So this is how our employees scored each question. So for example, I will start with the bottom question of the basic need, expectations. So about 6% of employees strongly disagreed that they knew what was expected of them at work. And then the other 94% of employees, well, we had some neutral employees, and then the other employees strongly agreed. However, when you compare that to other Gallup users, we are in the 19th percentile, even though there's a lot of green and blue. Well, it looks like blue here, but compared to other Gallup users, they have higher scores than us. Okay. And then Gallup provides the data by years of service. So employees, if you look at the top scale at the top, the lighter green colors are the lower percentile. And then as you move towards the darker green color, that's where you're in the higher percentile, meaning that you have a higher engagement score. So employees who have been here for 1 year, you see more green, or less than a year, you see more green. So those employees tend to be more engaged, or according to the results, are more engaged. You see a slight dip in the 1 to 3 years, and in the 3 to 5 years, it goes back up a little bit in terms of engagement scores. And then finally, employees with 5 or more years, that you start seeing it's a little bit lighter, that color. Well, the color is lighter. It's in the 1 to 24th percentile. So what is that? That's an opportunity right there for us to have touch points with people who have had 5 or more years of service with the district. And it's an opportunity for us to reach out to them and look at ways where we can ensure that there's more positive engagement with that group. Of course, taking into consideration all groups, right? And then Gallup does provide the information by generations. So Gen Z, that color, you see the darker green colors with the Gen Z group, whatever is happening here, Gen Z is appreciative of it. The millennials, it drops, and then Gen X, it drops, and then it goes back up with the baby boomers. Okay, so positive notes in summary of the engagement. results, positive notes, we have a slightly higher engagement mean than we did the last time. We have fewer actively disengaged employees, which is a good thing. And we've had engaging conversations around the results. All of the division directors had division meetings where we reviewed the results of the survey with the employees and had questions around those results to just get feedback and and just some conversation around how employees are feeling. And then the results will inform our prioritization for the next steps. And our next steps would be a survey in 3 to 5 years. This will give us time to let the ripple have an effect on our work group. And I just want to tie us back to the mission of the Ripple team, which is to cultivate a people-first culture by creating engagement, opportunity, and collaboration throughout the organization. So, and that concludes my report.
Terrific. Matt, any comments?
Vicki, thanks for the deeper dive into this. It'll be interesting to see if we use this as a touch point, kind of aligning with the Ripple efforts, and if this is a point from which we can start matching judgment to see if our efforts are doing what they should be doing with that. So look forward to more in the future. Thank you.
This is always great information, Vicki, and much appreciated. And I can see some value, obviously, in repeating the survey to be able to compare from year to year. I also think, though, that when we do these surveys, it's a lot of work. And I wonder whether going forward, thinking about, I mean, these is a very standardized survey that Gallup develops for all types of people. But I wonder, and businesses and so forth, but I wonder whether there are some specific questions that when we're going to do a survey that, are more tailored to us as an organization. And so, I think I would suggest that before we do the next survey, if we do these on an annual basis, that come to the board and maybe even and even the employee engagement group that just presented to us, is there a question or two that we could be repeating year after year, so that, again, we have ongoing data, but also come to the board and see, because it's a chance to gather information across the organization that might be more specific to us, that could help reveal places, again, where we could do better.
Thanks. Larry, any comments?
Glad to see the improvements from 16. That's nice. I thought this was familiar. Then you put that slide up and I remembered the 16 event. Yeah. How do you engage the people that don't sit at a computer every day?
So we did go out to the employee events to get them to respond to the survey. So we did, we had QR codes, we had messaging throughout the organization, we had boards across the street. So, but I think the next time we'll probably want to have an event around it, so that
I have a what?
have an event where people are gathered. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what do you think the cost is of this?
The
roughly?
cost of conducting the survey? It's about 15,000, but it's not just the survey. Yeah, it's just other resources that the company
Yeah, it's hard
provides.
to estimate
Yeah.
those. And what is the plan for renewal? Is it annual, or is it 8 years, or is there a plan?
Yeah, so we did a 1-year contract because we didn't know how often we were going to survey. And so because we're looking at surveying 3 to 5 years, then we will renew a contract at that time.
Great, thanks. Monty, I like your comment about seeing how you can connect with the Ripple team and link the data. Specifically, the employee engagement and satisfaction, for 5+ years and even more for 10+ years. That's a huge opportunity for us. And so, Alex, with your team, I think it might be really interesting to see how we can help people be thoughtful about, their input and how to advance their careers. Maybe that's a way to do it, or bringing family in. So I'd love to measure that again. Lastly, I'd love to see you do this in 2 years, not 3 to 5. I think that what you're doing right now with the cultural work, I have a hunch you're going to have a pretty big bump, and let's make that a target. a 2-year target to show improvement here. And then come back. I don't know if anyone else agrees.
I would agree with that.
Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, what I'm trying to do with all this is have the committee drive these initiatives, and so, for example, we did talk about, are there any other questions or surveying that we think we need at this time, for example? And there was a sense, boy, we got all this data, all this analytics, let us start digging into this. And so I think, in fact, our next meeting is at 1:00 today. So I'm going to bring that up and talk to him. But it probably does make sense with all the work we're doing to kind of calibrate is this hitting the mark?
I think that's a good idea. Maybe the committee can help you think through additional questions that Monty was saying. I'd love to see the staff report on how they think the board's doing. And I'd love us to be accountable as well. So have that as a question. Is the board supportive in a way that you need and engaged?
Yeah, just one other thing about the 2-year look to redo this. I think it's going to help the committee where it's going to drive their efforts as well. Because if they see positive change, they know they're doing the right thing. If they don't see it, then it's time to recalibrate and move forward. So the earlier, the better, realistically.
And maybe the committee can have specific targets. Like, okay, let's focus on these key items that we think are important to drive culture and support and then report back. Thank you. Yeah. Terrific.
And there are no comments.
Any public comments?
There are none.
Okay. Are we ready for Brett? Next item? Okay. Thank you, Vicky. Moving on to Brett, who's going to give us a financial update. That was for information only, by the way, for the board. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brett Uppendahl, Finance Director. I'm trying to share my screen here for this month's financial update. Let's see. There we go. So this is the first monthly update of this fiscal year. And as such, we only have 1 month to report on. So this can be a relatively brief presentation, and we can go to the questions if needed. We will have more year-end in terms of last year's final year-end information at the next Finance Committee meeting. We're still wrapping up some of our year-end adjustments and accruals. And as the board may remember, we have a 2-month billing cycle, so we do make adjustments over the summer to account for the July and August financials. So this is just kind of an initial read on the first month, and obviously we'll be coming back each month for the rest of the year, kind of filling in the rest of the details here. Like I said, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because it's so preliminary. We're 8% or so of the fiscal year has passed. If you look at the numbers here, just kind of scanning down the budget actuals are right in that range. It's really hard to tell in the first month kind of the overall general trajectory. You can see water revenues there being pretty much consistent with where we'd expect to be, 7% as opposed to 8% linearly. We are a couple more percent behind if you look at kind of where we'd expect to be as of the July read. But again, we like to have the full 2-month cycle before we get too worried about kind of any 1 month in particular read here in the summertime. Capital revenues, those are fixed. So those do come in more regularly down there at the bottom. We do have some grants that are programmed, so those have not come in yet. But overall, capital maintenance fee revenues are coming in as expected. We do have the prior year over there as well, just for reference, and that's something that we started in the middle of last year. We'll keep that going throughout the year so we can kind of generally see in comparison to last year how we're doing. Just along the top line there, water revenue, you can see we're better on percent to budget, and we're also better on kind of a bottom line level, 9.8 million compared to 6.4 as part of the overall kind of plan for increased revenues in the summer. And we'll note to the board that this does not include the next kind of the second year of rate adjustments. This still reflects the first year rate adjustments as we start billing for that in September to reflect actual July and August usage. So this is pretty much the last month of last year's rate structure. And again, as you can see here, 1 month of the fiscal year, within 2 or 3% in general across the board. We are kind of we recalibrated the budget this year. I would note that, some of these budget targets are really based on kind of last year's and the prior year actuals. Each year we adjust them based on customer behavior and for the new targets. And so we are adjusting these, and kind of a general reminder to the board too is that the farther we get away from the rate study that was 2 years ago, the farther we are away from our predictions. So we're kind of in this recalibration mode all year as we get ready for the budget preparations here in the spring. So a lot of the next couple of months will be informative and start to really lay that groundwork for where we're headed into the next budget cycle. Again, this first month is kind of just the first marker along there, and we'll be looking closer at August, September, October as we really start our planning process for the year. Water consumption, this has been a real consistent trend over the last, year or two, in the sense of, consistent, small incremental increases in overall consumption. You can see there fiscal year 25 in July. So again, 1 month, we're a tick higher, a couple percent higher than the prior year. We've seen this kind of steady gain since fiscal year 23. Fiscal year 22 actually, it dipped down just for July, but 23 actually ended up coming back ahead of fiscal year 22 in the end. Long way of saying we've seen this kind of small and consistent, bounce back, but it certainly is nowhere near the 10-year average there you can see, which is about 1,800 acre feet in July. So still well below long-term averages, but kind of on that predictable and consistent kind of, small bounce back year by year.
I think, Brett, like as with all of our work, water consumption is really weather dependent. We went through some really hot periods in July. The fact that we didn't see a bigger bump there is actually, I think, kind of, I don't want to read too much into numbers, but given how hot things were, I'm kind of surprised we didn't see a bigger increase.
So a reminder on this, because it does get a little, when we're looking at billing, so it's the prior 2 months from July. So it's kind of May, June-ish. But still, it had been, we're going to see it more when we look at our demand graphs as part of the water supply. You're starting to see that tick up a little more this year because it brings in July and August. So it's the current demand, as you'll see in the water supply updates, is a bit higher this year. Probably close to the increment from 23 to 24, but still well below the average and notably below, the peak that we had in fiscal year 21.
Yeah, it definitely does get a little bit confusing with the two month lag and, just 1 month of data here. And then I would also just point out that the July reads that we have here are the smaller of the two batches, right? We have 2 monthly reads. The July reads is a smaller read, so we're not getting as big of a sample size here as well. And then just to kind of round out the report today, and this is consistent with all the monthly reports, expenses at the end. And again, we're seeing the initial pattern that we've seen in the last year or two with personnel services just slightly below kind of the budgeted expectations, as we are still not quite up to full staffing yet. And we do, in terms of things like overtime and in terms of like additional pays, those tend to come in more in the wintertime. Maintenance operations is really low right now. That's because we're rolling forward a lot of the encumbrances from the prior year, so we haven't seen those expenses hit. But as soon as those contracts are available, those will fill up pretty fast. Financing and capital allocation, those are straight line allocations for us, so those are kind of set on course to be where they'll be by the end of the year. And then capital expenses, even with encumbrances down, those encumbrances on the bottom there is pretty low. And again, we're rolling forward a lot of those contracts from the prior year to finish out the second year of our budget. So I think by next month, there'll be a little bit more information on trends and targets here. So summary, rate revenues through our first month are below the budget by about 4.5 or 5%. Again, not much of a reason to worry at this point, as we need to get a couple more reads in. Operating and expenses are also both below budget. So kind of on a bottom line basis, we're doing okay through 1 month. Water consumption is consistent with our budgeted amount in the sense that we've, recalibrated the budget for our monthly expectations, and we were really close here in July. It was 1% higher than the prior year, kind of indicating that, slow and steady return towards kind of our longer term averages. But our overall consumption still remains 10% below those historical averages. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, Matt.
Brett, thank you again for this new format. It continues to make it really easy to understand, so thank you. A question, and not for today to answer, but actually to get more of your thoughts if it's possible. Constantly reevaluating how we alter the rates in this last rate cycle. One of the big components of that, I think, which is significant, was doing away with the summer water rates. And is there a way to be able to express or show over this cycle, this budget, the 4-year budget, 4-year rate increase, excuse me, just looking at the summertime use and see if it's correlated at all, or there's been a decrease due to that, and see if that's a motivating factor, just to be able to learn from what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely a good point. And we're already starting to work on that. We're trying to take the last couple months of kind of customer behavior and trying to overlay that with kind of how it would have been before the rate increase. So we'll bring that back in the coming months.
Yeah, even if it's over the 4-year cycle, we get it in a year or two, that's fine too, just to understand the impacts of that.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I'll just echo that. It would be really interesting to have you try to give a thought to how to tease out that dynamic. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why numbers go up and down, including the weather, like I mentioned, but pricing also, is going to be a factor as well, and maybe in the upper tiers, particularly compared to the bottom tiers, where the price point is been sharper.
We're going to be doing right, we talk about demand financially, but also, of course, in water supply. In context of water supply, we're going to be bringing to the board a pretty deep dive analytical review of our demand, kind of in terms of our water supply initiatives, as we start understanding what the rebound may be and how it may be different, at least at this point, indications from what we were planning during the early Jacob study, for example, and how the different assumptions of where it may land may fit into our long-term planning, and we may really benefit from all the work the ratepayers have done. So that's coming to the board in a pretty deep analytical way.
Great. No questions for me. Brett, thank you for the report out. Any public comments?
There are none.
Okay. That was for information only, and we'll move on to our quarterly investment report with Brett again.
So this again is relatively brief and routine in nature, information only. But this does round out our investment report from the prior fiscal year. So as of June 30th, and as the staff report says, we have over 72 million in deposit with LAIF. We have about nearly 4 million in a money market fund. We have about 11 million as of the end of the year in our checking account. That is a higher balance than usual in the checking account. I would just note that we keep it there to be able to pay our debt service early in July. And so typically our checking account goes lower as we get later in the year, but as June 30th, it was over 11 million. Our fiscal year to date interest was over 2.6 million, nearly 2.7 million last year, which was by far the most we've had in recent history. So definitely seeing the better impact of higher interest rates, and especially the sustained duration of the higher interest rates. And so we'll definitely take that windfall when we can. I consider it more of a one-time gain, and as I mentioned all through the spring last year, it helps offset some of our lower than expected revenues. I am expecting that to stay pretty similar this entire year. I know they talk about rate cuts coming our way, but the way that LAIF is structured, they have much more long maturities in their portfolio, so it'll tend to kind of peel off slowly. Even if the Fed does any kind of a quick rate adjustment that they've been talking about for the last few quarters. I would anticipate our effective return to still maintain a pretty good tail over the next year. We'll obviously keep a good eye on that as we get into the budget cycle, but I do expect there to be similar results as we get into this year. The average effective yield for our LAIF investments, as the staff report says, was 3.9%, so nearly 4%, which is again very, very healthy compared to historical averages here. And so we're again, just generally grateful that that's there for us as another kind of a windfall for a year or two, and recalibrate going forward. And that's pretty much all I have here in my staff report. Happy to answer any questions on the portfolio and or future planning.
Thank you for the report. All good. No public comment. All set. Moving on to item 4E, our capacity charge study.
Great. And so this one I do have a presentation for, and this one will be a little bit longer item. And so I believe we're bringing in some panelists here, right? Yeah, good. So let me see if I can share this. Here we go. 1, 2. So capacity charge study. So with us here joining us is Eric Helgeson and Alex Handlers from Bartle Wells. We are working with them over the next couple months to evaluate our current connection fees, and I'll explain what those are as we get into this, and to start considering how we may want to make adjustments to our connection fee structure. The board may recall, let's see here. The title of this, let me just back up a little bit, is called Capacity Charge Study, and I'll talk about why that's different from connection fees as we typically talk about them, but just to kind of allay any concerns, they are essentially the same thing. Capacity charges are just more of kind of a standard industry term for them. So, embedded in this is I think we'd like to move towards changing the title of our connection fees towards capacity charges, as it is really more of an accurate way of representing what we're charging customers for. But I'll get to that in just a minute. The presentation overview here, we'll talk a little background, talk about how the connection fee study goes, talk about our current fee structure, and then give the board a sense for the project plan and timeline going forward. And there'll be time at the end to be able to take any input from the board and kind of talk about the next steps. So background here, what are capacity charges? So again, we've commonly referred to them as connection fees here, as it says there, but a capacity charge really is, as it says on the slide here, a one-time fee that's paid by new customers as a condition of the development. And so when we have a new customer or a new connection to our system, we charge them a fee to kind of represent the capacity that they'll be absorbing within our current system. So as a second bullet there, we calculate the fee to recover the costs for the district for having that extra capacity that lets the development grow around us or within our service area. We also do levy these fees if there is a change in property use or a change in any use that results in increased capacity over the long term. So if there's a business or a kind of a major development on an existing property, we will levy an additional charge for that kind of long-term expected use of our system.
Yeah, but real quick clarification, is that including when a building triggers fire sprinklers?
I don't believe so. I don't believe that necessarily, prompts a long-term impact. I think fire sprinklers by their nature are, one-time or short-term. So I don't think that includes necessarily a long-term impact on the expected demand. And so it'd more be, for a change in business use, a new business occupying an old facility and or a major remodel to a house that indicates a longer-term sustained use.
Great, thank you.
And so the legal framework here, obviously, that's always top of mind when we talk about the fees that we are charging and our overall rate structure. So we want to be mindful of the legal framework that we are kind of working within here. All water and wastewater capacity fees are governed by Section 66013, which I think was codified by Assembly Bill 1600. The key provision there, which applies to almost all fees the government is charged, but the fee shall not exceed the estimated reasonable cost of providing the service. So we can't just charge any fee we want to. We have to have a reason for it, and we have to make sure that the fee does not exceed the reasonable cost of providing that service. Within that, we can recover costs for our existing facilities, which is what our current structure does. And there is a provision in there for being able to fund future facilities through this fee. It gets to be a little bit complex, and that's something we're certainly going to be taking a look at over the next few months. But the charge for let me just back up and say in kind of plain words, you have to really have a good sense here for, recovering your existing, investments in the system and planned future investments in the system. But you also have to be able to separate that from what's being paid through ratepayer funds. And then at the end of the day, you have to be able to segregate the capacity charges from other funds. So a lot of that's accounting, a lot of that's behind the scenes, but a lot of it is also kind of, you want to lay that out in the structure of fees at the forefront. So you're sure you're not double counting anywhere, and you're sure you can easily explain which monies are going to which purpose for the district. So in our methodology here, a lot of times you look at these methodologies, they seem relatively simple, and certainly the complexities and the details as you really work through these, but it really is relatively straightforward on kind of the conceptual basis. Number one, we take a look at our current facilities and assets and kind of historically look at how much investments our current customers have put in to the system that we have, determining that value and what it costs to in terms of depreciation and replacement. And then if there's any concrete capital expansion related items that we can include in that, we will. Then we look at the capacity, right? So if we've invested this much money into our facilities and we have these future plans, how much water is that providing? How much capacity of our services do we have to give out? And then you really, step 3 there is just kind of dividing step 2 by step 1. So, the cost of our total or capacity of our facilities divided by the cost we put into it. And that really gives you this kind of, unit cost. And then step 4 there is providing that unit cost to, the relative needs of a new development. So it's basically kind of putting it into a ratio and saying there's a cost per acre foot of, buying into our system. And then from there, we determine the needs of the new development, how many acre feet per year, will you need? And therefore that kind of determines your overall cost to buy into all the investments that the district has put into our system. So again, relatively straightforward in the, step-by-step process here. But as you'll see over the coming months, that the complexities come in when we really start talking about, 100 years, over 100 years of existing here. How do we count that? How do we allocate that? And how do we make sure we're really kind of dotting our I's and crossing our T's to make sure we don't double count and make sure we're really being clear to the customers what they're paying for. So current capacity fee methodology. Staff last worked to update our methodology in 2018, and so it's been now 6 years. The current structure that we have for residential fees here is just kind of giving an example. We have basically we have a schedule of water use by area. So based on the average, a study done in 2018, each area of the district has an average water use, calculation. We have 15 major areas with up to 32 sub areas underneath that. And so there's a wide range of kind of the projected water use that if you're a customer in the residential side and you're building a house and or substantially changing the use of your house, it really depends on the geography and the location where you're at within the district service area as to what your fee will be. And so there's a wide range of that, as it shows there in that 4th sub bullet under their connection fees. It ranges from 0.9 acre feet per year in certain areas of the district to over 1.12 acre feet in other areas. So it really is a big range between 3,000 or about 4,000 a customer may have to pay to up to nearly 50,000 based on the area they live in. Our current connection fee methodology establishes a $44,000 per acre foot overall. And again, you're seeing that the range of, typical acre feet is between 0.1 and 1.1. So, the more average, typical customer there at the bottom is in area 1.1 and they use about 0.2 acre feet. And so kind of bottom line is the typical customer pays about 8,000 or maybe closer to 10,000 in connection fees for new development right now. Non-residential, meaning kind of more commercial connection fees. Those are based on a wide range of criteria that is essentially, 46 different business types, and each business type has kind of a typical water use per year, calculation. We've highlighted some of those for you there just to show the variation between a retail space, a laundry machine, a coffee shop, restaurant, that type of a thing. So again, the same 44,000 per acre foot of estimated water. In this case, it's more business specific and business type specific. So, just to, again, put a common example out there for the board and the public to understand, if you had a restaurant with 50 seats in it, you'd be paying about $60,000 or $65,000 in connection fees to provide the water for all your customers and, including, cleaning and including all the other things you need to do to run a restaurant. But that's about where it comes out to be 0.02 acre feet per seat. So again, a little bit confusing, but that is the structure we have now. The observations we've made, internally and in consultation with Bartle Wells here is that our current fee calculation methodology is really not consistent with the industry standard. It is very complex. As I mentioned, we have all the different residential areas with kind of their own internal calculations of average water use. We also have, use this kind of industry code based kind of structure for commercial accounts. And so it's much more complicated, much more complex, and not consistent with industry standards. And then underneath all this is they're based on estimates, which are not really frequently updated and may be difficult to update, right? Kind of the expected use of a restaurant is not something that we necessarily have, great data for, and it takes a lot of effort to update that data over time. Right now, we're whatever it is, 6 years past our last study. So I think we're probably in pretty good shape. The longer we go without updating those kind of underlying schedules, the more risky it gets in the sense of, not being, not kind of holding up our end of the bargain and having a reliable methodology. So that's why we're looking at this now, is we think we would like to kind of move more towards a kind of a consistent industry standard. And I'll talk about that more later. And we need to make sure, like, again, we're updating these more regularly along the way, just to keep ourselves compliant with legal regulations. So in terms of other agencies and how do we compare, this is kind of a standard list that we use in the sense of, you know, our neighbors and some of the best practices here in our area. But you can kind of, you know, we tried to structure this to look down the commercial and residential size and what's the overall methodology. And then as the far column there shows, you know, what's a typical amount a resident might pay for a residential a connection fee. So Dublin, San Ramon, you know, it's all meter size, and a typical standard fee would be about $15,000. East Bay Mud, again, meter size largely. For those of you familiar with the East Bay Mud service area, it's huge. They have a couple different zones that have substantially different service requirements and investment areas. So they do break it out by zone. So there can be different fees in each zone. It gets a little complex. For simplicity purposes here, we tried to put the residential fee that would be of kind of the lowest or the most typical type of construction in that area. So $13,000 in East Bay Mud is a typical fee.
But just real quickly for clarification, they break up by zones, not because of water demand, but actually infrastructure need to deliver the water.
That's my understanding. It's the infrastructure need to deliver the water. In some cases, the elevation. In some cases, it's where the water supply comes from, but that's my understanding. Cool. City of Santa Rosa is a little bit different. They're more of a pass-through agency. They use estimated water use on the commercial side, and I believe they base that on wastewater billing. And then on the residential side, they include lot size. So they're one of the few that includes lot size in their calculations, and they have 3 basic categories. They have one of the lower fees in the area of $4,000 for a typical residential project. The PUC there, San Francisco, they go fully on meter size on both sides, commercial and residential. They have a relatively low fee, and it's my understanding that they just recently introduced this fee only in the last 10 or 15 years. It's not something that San Francisco had implemented before, so really just kind of easing into this. And it's not something they had on their books prior to about 15 years ago. Alameda County, meter size for commercial and kind of a flat fee for all residential. So they don't even consider meter size. It's just a typical residential will be a flat fee at $11,000. And North Marin is similar. So they have a peak day demand on commercial and a flat fee on residential for $28,000, which is the highest in our general area around here. And again, at the bottom there is Marin Water. We have a different, obviously, as I mentioned in the prior slides, a different structure for both commercial and residential, where we have, you know, very specific estimated water use by industry type on commercial and or by kind of zone and subzone within a residential. At the end of the day, our fee is relatively modest in comparison to what you see here, kind of in the middle, around $10,000 for a typical development size. So again, the total fee probably, you know, looks similar on this chart here. It really is kind of the underlying methodology and structure that's so much different that we'll be looking to update if we can. So project plan wise, you know, we started this about a month ago, working with Bartle Wells, maybe more now, maybe 2 months ago, just really kind of data sharing and talking through some of the emerging trends and some of the what's going on around us. Here we are today at the Finance Committee meeting to give the board a sense for the plan. We'll be kind of, you know, taking your input and going back to the books in September and October and kind of working on options and recommendations. We'll bring those back to this committee here in Finance. You know, assuming that we are all on the same page, our plan would be to move forward to a board meeting in November, and then we will work with Molly and the legal team to update any resolutions and code around that same time. So that's the general project plan. Again, we got a couple months ahead of us here to finalize our work, but I wanted to make sure we had this in front of the board at this time to get your input and feedback before we get too far down the project track. I've mentioned these in a couple different ways throughout the presentation, but I think our guiding principles as we, you know, update our capacity charges is number 1, to be legally compliant with the government code. Number 2, to do our best job to recover our costs for our existing facilities that may benefit any future growth here in the area. We would like to, you know, look at how we can maybe utilize a more industry standard methodology, as I mentioned a few times, and what would that take, and how do we go about doing that, and what would be the impacts, obviously, to commercial and to residential. And at the end of the day, you know, we want to make sure we're doing right by our customers. We want to be equitable and proportional to all of our existing customers as well as our future customers. So, you know, that's embedded in the government code, you know, but I think we want to make sure we're really, you know, holding true to that and being equitable and proportional wherever we can. So that is the 4 guiding principles here. Next steps will be, you know, working with Bartle Wells here to complete our data gathering and analysis. We'll come back in October with our initial findings and recommendations, and then hopefully submit our final proposal to the board in November, and kind of take it from there. So that concludes my presentation. Again, I do have Eric and Alex here with me to answer any of the finer details. I'm happy to take any comments or questions from the board and the public at this time.
Maybe before board comments, Eric, Alex, anything you want to add?
Just we're excited to jump into the study, and I think Brett did a really good job of summarizing the high level direction we're going, and we're already well into the data gathering, and I think we're on keeping a good pace, and yeah, thanks for having us back.
Same comments from my end. Thanks.
Great. Matt?
Yep, sounds good. Brett, thank you very much for bringing this forward and for the accelerated timeline, as well as we look to be in a period of Marin where there's going to be more growth than there has been in some time. So it's important, especially when we constantly fielding questions from the public about, is this new housing project going to further push us into drought or whatever the case may be? And we have the ability now to really assess how they can support the system and be part of it and buy in, which is incredibly important. And especially when we're looking at aging infrastructure, water supply, et cetera, but also to walking the fine line of making sure that development doesn't get too stymied from anything. So I appreciate the close look. One question would be, and we're seeing a lot of local ordinances throughout the county within our service area of multi-unit buildings looking to move to meters for individual units as part of assessments. And so what that would look like with this, should a 12 unit building be forced, that's got one water meter now, be forced into 12 water meters, what does that do to the landlord or owner? And I think we need to be really sensitive on that piece. So if we can, understanding that, the impacts of that. And then the second would be, as part of this study, a recommendation to the board for a refresh cycle or reevaluation of connection fees going forward. So we're not waiting as long if it's not appropriate.
Great comments from Matt. I just would add, I'm assuming that when when a restaurant or a business takes over another location where there was already a meter, there's no new connection fee. It's only for where you're establishing service where there has not been previously.
Yes, so that's my understanding, is that when you purchase a building, you inherit their kind of grandfathered allotment. And then it's up to you to work with our staff to determine if that's the correct allotment for you. And if there is a change in use, then you would pay the difference.
That's right.
Molly was all set and you got it. You covered it perfectly. You got the right answer. A plus. Same thing with so I'm wondering how this touches down with ADUs, because that's it is an increased use on a piece of property. And yet at the same time, we have a desire to try to make additional housing, affordable, and that kind of infill. You're talking, if you think of a piece of property that's currently, obviously, if there's not a structure there, you're now taking part of that landscape that might be in landscaping, and now you're turning it into a housing, into some housing of some sort. If that's replacing lawn, that might even be I don't want to say it's a water savings, but there's an offset. So I'm just wondering if we're giving some thought about in the infill, in the concept of infill, where we're seeing a reduction on one hand from on the property by developing that space, but now you have a new use.
So I'll take a quick shot at that. I'm not sure if Molly wants to kind of fill in on that, but it has been the district's policy not to charge an additional connection fee on ADUs to this point. And so I think, I don't know the full story and the reasoning for that, but it is our current code and our current policy that we don't charge a connection fee for an ADU under certain circumstances in terms of the size of the ADU and how it's attached to the property. Right.
Yeah, we do have some specific code provisions and a board policy on that we'll need to look at closely as we move forward. There's also some statute out there about how additional fee, connection fees or capacity charges can be charged to ADUs. And so, all of that, I think, is something that we'll want to look at closely and then bring further discussion in the future of what do we want to sustain that. There are some subsidies that happen from our unrestricted funds for those purposes to not charge in some cases. So, and it is, I think, there are some additional restrictions in the code regarding, who's living in the ADU, if there's affordability factors, if it's somebody that, also lives on site, so that owns the property. So things like that we want to look at, I think we'll have to dig into.
Okay, great. I understand I don't fully understand, but you're speaking to the complexities of the considerations, and I appreciate that. And I I'll just say overarchingly, we want to be supportive. I personally believe we should be supportive of infill development like that does create housing, given the housing crisis that we have. The other piece too, I was looking at the numbers when we were looking at substantial costs of a residential property to add a new connection. If it's a large size property, we're making an assumption that that property is going to be a high consumer of water. And I wonder whether there's I'm just going to use the term easements for lack of a more correct term, probably, which is if somebody acquires a big, has acquired a piece of land and it's an acre and a half, and we're like, wow, you turn that into lawn, that could be a lot of water demand. But if there was an easement or some sort of agreement that much landscape would not occur, then the development fee, then the cost of the new hookup could be kept at a lower. And if somebody wanted to add greater landscaping, then they have to pay the fee to be able to increase that landscaping. Maybe this is completely infeasible, but in part, if somebody's going to buy a big piece of property and they're going to keep it in a low or water use or a natural state, we'd like to encourage that, I would like to think. And then if somebody does want to turn it into a much larger, more water using landscape, they understand the cost that is directly connected to that greater water use. I don't know if that's a smart incentive or not, but I looked at that number and I was like, really depends on what you do with that much land. So maybe food for thought. And maybe, again, this is probably a question that I believe other, municipalities have had to deal with.
So I would say that we can definitely take a look at that. I think the gist of it, and I'll turn it over maybe to Bartle Wells or we have Joseph here to talk through that a little bit too. But I think the gist of it is the methodology you choose. You're either trying to estimate specific properties, which is kind of what we're doing now, and use, and that gets pretty tricky and complex. Or you're saying, meter size or something standard that everyone uses is kind of the standard. And so in that case, I think what you're talking about is if the meter size was big enough to support, the extra water use, that's what we would charge them on a connection fee basis. And then they would be using the tier structure and the rates to kind of get at what you're saying in terms of, paying the cost for the water. But, and this will come out more in the actual report, but that's my understanding at this point, is that you're either trying to get very specific on all your properties, or you're trying to kind of more broad brush it and say, well, this is the maximum capacity that anyone would use. So as long as that works for you, you'll pay the difference in your rates.
I think that's absolutely correct. And so, it's a matter of what kind of structure do you want to build and what level of complexity do you want to have? And I'm certainly, we have some experts here who are going to help look at some options. I mean, you have seen in comparison agencies, the use of different factors, lot size versus meter size versus use versus, so there are a number, I think, of different ways to approach the structure. But there are also, I think, justifications for particular approaches that would, drive that too. So those are all good questions.
So I'll definitely put it as a note for us to take a look at and bring back for options in one of the upcoming meetings.
Great. Thank you for the report out. Just one quick question. Do we have any policy around either grant money or other funds available to make or help with lower income folks get access to these fees? We do have grant money for water use potentially, and I'm wondering if we can help folks, because a $10,000 check might be a big number to add.
What are you saying?
I would say that we do have a payment plan, and Joseph can jump in if I'm incorrect, for allowing payment of connection fees over a period of time so that they aren't as big a hit on the front end. So that's one thing that we offer. And then I think the ADUs is another area where we've, tried to facilitate, the potential for lower income residential development.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm actually going to go ahead and so Joseph Eichens is our engineering services manager. He is now joining us online. He's actually administers these fees. He knows the details much better than I do. And I'll go ahead and correct myself once because I'm sure he's chomping at the bit to correct me from earlier. So ADUs, we don't charge connection fees on ADUs for existing properties. If it's a brand new development, then we do include that in the overall property use. So we do charge ADUs going forward on new properties. And I'll turn it over to Joseph to fill in any color that I may have missed or correct me on anything else that I've said.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Yeah, several topics here. The ADUs, yes, we have, the board has gone above and beyond the state law regarding how we charge for ADUs to try and simplify it. The conversions of existing space are fee-free. The district is prohibited by state law from charging a connection fee on a conversion of existing space. So fees are applicable upon new construction of ADUs, whether that's attached or detached. But we do offer a program for waiver of those fees for qualifying customers. So that's available. In terms of affordable housing and a payment plan for connection fees, we do have existing board policies that we're going to review at this time, not only for payment plans of the connection fee itself, up to 5 years, but also there's discounts for qualifying units for affordable housing projects, and we offer 50% off of the connection fee for those that do qualify. So we'll be looking at those as part of the study.
That's terrific. Thank you. Anything else, Brett?
No, that's it.
All right. Thank you for the presentation. Any public comments, Terry?
Yes, Jack, please.
With regards to the connection fee, I noticed the numbers were very all over the map. And I'm surprised that's even possible within Proposition 218 and was just curious how those numbers could be so different. Is it because the metrics by which they calculate the connection fees differ by district, or is it exempt from 218? Or I just wanted to know.
Thank you for your comment.
Great. Brett, thank you for the monthly presentation and report out. And I'm just curious when we'll be looking at the next budgeting process and when that kicks off.
Sure. So, I mean, we'll have to have a budget. We have a 2-year budget cycle here. We'll have to have a budget by next June in terms of board approval. And so typically we'll start a budget workshop in that March, April timeframe to have ourselves a month or two with the board and the public to refine that before we bring it back for final. That means internally we're working on it, in the wintertime, December, January, February, doing our internal review and our internal meetings and prioritization. We'll do kind of more of a formal kickoff, I say before that, just to kind of set the stage, but really the internal work is over the winter time, and then the work kind of more public facing begins in March.
Okay. Thanks for the report out. Moving on to item 4F, we'll have Molly, our general counsel, present on updated views of our handbook and ethics policies.
And I'm sure you all saved the best for last.
Yeah, this has been a robust meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, I just changed it. Let's get back. Okay. Good morning still. I am Molly McLean, General Counsel for the district, and I'm going to try to make this somewhat quick, but you'll notice in the PowerPoint that the material is copious and a little bit dense. So there's a bit to cover, and we'll do our best. Our purpose and goals today, to review board policy number 50. Okay, well, that's not the board handbook. That's actually another policy that the board adopted, the board ethics policy. The reason we're going to review it is because it's separate and apart currently from the board handbook. We want to take a look at what's in there and understand that, and then look at how we can integrate that into the board handbook so that we have one place for board members to look for guidance. We'll go ahead and we'll attempt to cover today section 1, which is the introduction and purpose of the board handbook. We'll review the provisions, consider proposed changes, and in the incorporation of board policy number 50. We'll do the same with section 2. So the board handbook was adopted first in 2021 by the board. The handbook's intended to, be a place for board members and even staff to go and look for guidance in how the board functions, what the interactions with board and staff are, some of the legal guidance that governs public agency and board practice. And it's necessary to look at the handbook from time to time to make sure we're updating for changes in the law or even policy. So jumping back to board ethics policy number 50, the board policy number 50 was actually adopted in March 5th of 2013. So it predated the board handbook to promote the ethical behavior of conduct of district business. So that's the stated purpose. And in looking at, when we talked first about embarking upon the review of the board handbook, I did indicate that I was going to go back and look at all the policies of the board and see where we could streamline. We did do some of that streamlining, actually sunsetting some earlier board policies in 2021, just after the adoption of the board handbook. But for some reason, board policy number 50 didn't get integrated or streamlined. And so I think that that's a good endeavor for us to take now, because it really makes sense, in my opinion, to have one place for all of these kind of guidance provisions. What the ethics policy covers. So I'm going to run through it quickly. You guys have a copy of it, of course, and it's available on our website under board policies. It does cover a lot, but there is a lot of overlap with existing law as well as the board handbook. It speaks to the responsibilities of public office and, of course, upholding the constitutions of the United States and California, complying with legal requirements, and the fair and open process involved in public governing. So the Brown Act, of course, and then stating the obvious: do not discriminate nor grant special treatment as a public agency. It speaks to the proper use and safeguarding of district property and resources by the board. It speaks to safeguarding confidential information. So not disclosing confidential information without the board's authorization, the board as a whole. So that covers our closed session, attorney-client privilege discussions, and items that are not subject to disclosure under the Public Records Act. And if there's a question about that, I'm happy to help answer those questions. And that's why you have the general counsel's office. There is an exception stated here, and I think it's important to note that a board member can make confidential inquiry or complaint to the district attorney or grand jury as necessary to establish alleged illegality of district action. So if there's serious enough concern, there may be a need to breach that confidentiality. But first, this policy says that you should bring it to the attention of the president of the board or the full board in a lawful and appropriate manner to provide opportunity to cure the alleged violation. My suggestion would be, if there's a concern about something like that, that the general counsel's office is a source of assistance in that. Conflicts of interest, I think we're all familiar with that. This policy says we want to avoid actual conflicts of interest as well as appearances of conflict, because the public is really paying attention and wants government agencies to be accountable. So it addresses financial conflicts, 1090 issues, which are contracts. And these are all really reiterations of what's already in the FPPC regulations and state law. Political contributions, so campaign contributions, we've spoke a little bit, and we had a little bit of a review of the Levine Act extension to those running for office and not seeking contributions. This also explains that seeking contributions from district officers, employees, vendors, consultants, or contractors for, in supporting you for election is not allowed and will potentially conflict you out of future actions if they're in front of the board. It also addresses not using the seal trademark stationery of the district in the solicitation of political contributions. It addresses—
And only for a year, like the law is?
So The use of district trademark seals for
No,
political,
I'm
or are you
about
talking
the-
about the campaign contribution? Yeah, it's the Levine Act is
paralleling-
12 months on either side. The conflict of interest would run, correct?
Yeah, I think that's a bad part of the law. I think it should be longer. I think, and I think we should set it at 0, not the 250.
Not the $250 limit, right? Well, I hear you, and I don't, I don't write the law, but I do try to make sure we're aware of strict compliance. You can also do more, of course.
I'm
go above
proposing
and
that we
beyond.
make a change.
To consider a policy change here.
Yeah.
Okay, noted. If there's interest, we can look at incorporating something like that.
What specifically are you asking for?
I don't like the way the law reads, that it has this 250 is allowed. I think it should be 0. I don't think there should be a lower limit other than 0. And I think that the time should go through your appointment. So 4 years, that instead of being 1 year, it should be 4 years.
So I would say if there's an interest in revisiting that and looking at adopting something that's more restrictive than the new state legal requirements, that kind of be a standalone item, because there's a bit to unpack there, Larry. And I
fine.
think,
That's
but
fine.
if there's an interest, I'm certainly happy to bring something back.
Well, I would also like to know the history of how they got to what they got to.
Well, the Levine Act has been in place for appointees running for office, and the recent change was just to extend that. So I'd have to go back and do some legislative history research.
But I believe the numbers changed.
The $250 changed.
Yeah.
With the new law, that could be true.
That's what I recall.
That could be true. The biggest change that I recall is that it does also now apply to elected officials who are running for office, or someone running for an elected office as opposed to appointment. I know that the original Levine Act was adopted in response to Coastal Commission appointees who then who received contributions for running for an office. They were appointed on the Coastal Commission. They were running for office, and they were receiving contributions from folks who had things pending in front of the commission. So that's the origination. The recent extension on, I'm not sure exactly what the impetus was, but it's now in place. The policy also touches on incompatible offices, which is also existing law. So unless there's an exception, board members may not hold an incompatible public office, then deemed to have to relinquish one. That happens. And then candidate statements.
How do you define incompatible? I saw that, but what exactly does that mean?
Incompatible offices. Yeah. So if you were to want to run for Mill Valley City Council and be on the water board, because there's cross-jurisdictional issues, those would probably be considered incompatible. And so you would be deemed to have relinquished your first office when you were elected to the council, for example.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa.
Yeah. Correct.
And then no false or misleading information in candidate statements. It's pretty self-explanatory, I think. The policy itself, like our board handbook, also governs board member and general manager relationship, speaks to the fact that the board is the vehicle to set the policy through majority vote of the board for the district, and the general manager's job and role is to execute the policy adopted. And that issues that are, the board members may have with the execution or carrying out of certain policies, and the implementation of that should be directed to the general manager, except for functions that are under the general counsel's purview. It also speaks to responsible financial management, and we just had our financial updates, but it asks that the district ensure and maintain a system of auditing and accounting compliance with generally accepted accounting principles, or GAAP, and legal requirements, and that there's an independent audit done each year annually, which we do carry out. It speaks to director compensation, and I would suggest that we simply, it is consistent with the new policy and the code that we already have in place, and I would suggest that we just leave that be and let the policy speak for itself. It addresses improper activities and the reporting of such activities, asking that those be reported to the general manager. the general manager's purview to make sure that there's compliance with district administrative policies and make sure that employees are not engaging in improper activities. That's part of the general manager's role. Also to investigate allegations and take corrective actions. And of course, the general counsel's office typically assists with that.
Hey, I just want to touch on Molly. On the prior slide, it was compensation, and just share with the board. I'm not suggesting we open that now, but it is one of the most difficult things for an elected body to deliberate compensation. And often what that leads to is it just never gets caught up in cost of living. And so, you're really in doing it kind of helping future boards and maybe organizational to attract. It's just something to think about. Not suggesting now, but it's always kind of out there of when's the right time to have that discussion.
Well, since you brought that up, Ben, I think there is never a good time, and I know it's complex for a variety of reasons. And I know that some people might have seen the article that Dick Spotswood put out, and I think that it was fundamentally. I think this is an issue that is really one of equity and concern about who could actually serve in an elected office. And when we don't pay something reasonable to people who spend so much time working on these issues that serve the public, all you can ever have on a elected position is somebody who's wealthy enough to be able to afford that commitment of time, uncompensated. And I think that discourages, if not outright bars, people who do not come from economic means to be able to support that. So I'm not saying that necessarily our fee structure is impeding that or not. But I think when we're not even keeping pace with inflation, we're not addressing an issue that got addressed years ago. I'm sure that was not easy to do. And then we've just made it so that we have an ongoing problem that gets kicked down the road. And so whether it's this board or the next, it's an issue that just gets worse and worse with time. And so if there's an interest to take that up, I would definitely be supportive of us trying to address it, because I don't believe in kicking the can down the road. We've done a lot in the past couple of years to address uncomfortable, thorny issues, and this is, I think, one that remains. So I'd be supportive of us having to address that if there was interest in the board.
There is.
When's the right time?
Well, I have a couple of different thoughts. I mean, there's definitely different opportunities. I have heard, in conjunction with budget discussions, though I will point out that the board compensation amounts are so such a small piece of our budgets as to be almost insignificant to it. I think I'm not the finance director, but I think potentially at the beginning of the year, January, of course, then we have potential new board members. So it's possible that, it's a cleanup item that we consider, the end of this year. We did review the compensation policy thoroughly. So we did make some shifts. We didn't touch, obviously, the compensation amount. We did look at those relative to other agencies.
I would similarly not link it with the budget, because then it gets directly linked with the budget in ways that can be difficult. I think the best time would be for a number of reasons, like this December, for example, for us to think about it.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Let's go for a December decision on it. And if we need to have a meeting before then or a discussion, that's fine.
I think that's a good timing. But I think another option might be the COLA adjustment. It can be done routinely at July 1st. And then, the fallout's what the fallout is. It's for thinking persons. Right?
Okay, well, we'll take that under advisement. Thank you for the input on that. Where was I? So the board's job is to ensure, so general manager investigates, holds employees accountable. The board's job is to ensure that the general manager is operating the district in accordance with the law. the board is, should inform the general manager of improper activities, and not withhold information and not try to influence any decisions that need to be made regarding addressing those. Violations of ethics policies, rules should be reported. Any perceived violations should be reported by the board members to the board president or the vice president if related to the board president for investigation. You can also always come to the general counsel's office with concerns to see how those are addressed. In those rare situations where we have some violations or something egregious happens, there are some ways to address those. They're pretty severe. Censure is one, and injunctive relief to stop the behavior is another. That's, of course, a legal action, a court action, and potentially referral to the district attorney or the grand jury.
I don't
That's
think
all.
that's realistic.
Those are all covered in the policy.
I know, but I think it should be reviewed because I think talking to the council makes sense. I would never go to something like that to the president.
You mean the reporting
issue.
perceived? Yeah, we can look at that language.
I would be uncomfortable doing that.
I mean, I think it would potentially depend on the type of violation. If and where it was within the organization, then what would be the appropriate, place to go? Obviously, if it was
Board issues, right? Or just anybody.
perceived violations, yes, by board members to the board president. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I would not do that.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to go to the general counsel
Yeah.
first.
It's just, it's more comfortable because it's confidential and, it's complicated.
It can be. We can look at revising that. That's a point of a good point. Okay, so that was board policy 50. Now we're going to jump into our review of the board handbook. So that's all encompassed, some of it redundantly in this board policy pre-existing the board handbook, this is part of the cleanup process that I wanted to bring forward. What we're going to look at now is section 1 of the board handbook, the introduction and purpose. And then how do we fold in either provisions of board policy 50 where they're appropriately folded in, with your input on some potential revisions, which were helpful, which is why I wanted to cover the policy overall. But then also there may be some specifics to the board handbook that we're going to come across. So first, in the first instance, the purpose of the board policy number 50, I think, is important and additive to the purpose of the board handbook. So I would suggest that we do incorporate the provisions there into the board handbook just to broaden the scope a bit and cover some of those, ethical issues that come up. And then we would also seek to align the existing board handbook mission, values, and goals to make sure that they're consistent with our new strategic plan. Some changes independent of board policy 50 would be to, and we've taken some action on these already, but just making sure that our board handbook is updated consistent with this is to clarify when newly elected directors take office. We took some action in the code, but we want to make sure the policy is consistent with the code. It's the first Friday in December as dictated by the water code, but of course not before the election is certified by the Marin County elections officer. And then the election of board officers, we did agree already, or the board did direct that officers would be elected amongst the board members at the first meeting at which the newly elected directors take office, so we don't have a lag, or the first meeting in January in non-election years, because there's not the same, turnover in December that we're looking at. One issue that was raised by one of the board members, thank you, is committee vacancies pending appointments, where there may be a gap. And what I propose is just to say that those would be filled in for a short period of time as requested by the board president, just to keep it simple, but of course you could suggest differently. These are areas of the board policy number 50 that we would like to fold into the section 2 where it belongs, the responsibility of public office, fair and equal treatment by the board and the district, improper activities and reporting them, the exercise of responsible financial management. Again, lots of this is already covered, and we are just making sure that that we have them all fit in the right places and expound where appropriate. And then board member, general management, general manager relationship. One new provision that we're proposing to add to the handbook is just an explanation or advisement to the board, given that there are recent Supreme Court decision, Linkday versus Freed decision was about the use of social media by a public official who use their social media to discuss district business, which is not inappropriate, not prohibited, but the court found that that could create a public forum that would thereafter potentially restrict a board member's right to remove the comment or block others. So what does that mean? So in this case, it was, I think, a city council member who did discuss items on his or her Facebook page. Some comments that that person did not like came up, and so they attempted to remove them and block people from participating. And the court found that that council member couldn't do that because using it as a public forum or for public business, it then created a right amongst the users for equal access. So it's recommended that the board members be cognizant of that. And if there's questions, please see the general counsel's office. So that's the language that we're proposing. Any questions? Okay.
It's a little confusing.
The language or the rule?
Well, is it aimed at any use of the social media?
For
I don't use it, so I'm not, I mean, is it directed at a person or it's directed?
It's an individual elected official, probably, or appointed official of a public agency.
Sending a message to another official?
I think posting on Facebook or Instagram, posting things on
So a blog
Nextdoor
would be part of-
about their work with the
A
public
blog would
agency.
be part of that too.
Potentially, yes. If it's subject to comment by others. So it's a free speech issue. Creation of a public forum is a free speech, mantra that if you create a public forum, you have to provide equal access and you can't pick and choose which messages you like and which you don't like. So that's really what it's directed at.
So Molly, that would also be covered, letters to the editor or editorials potentially with media outlets that allow for comment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I would say there it's much more limited. There the person doesn't typically control the publication. So I don't know that you would that a public official would have the ability to prohibit comments. That would be up to the news outlet. So it's really that's probably not quite the same thing. We're talking about an individual who holds a Facebook account and they're the ones talking, they're the public official themselves, and then they would block someone from their Facebook account because they did not like the message or the comment or the commenter.
Or even delete. Right.
Yes, correct.
I think your language is clear to me. I'm good.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this one is a bit of a clarification of an existing provision in the board handbook regarding contact with media and use of title. This is a clarification that we thought would be helpful to the agency to really understand the roles and responsibilities. And I'm actually going to have our general manager speak to this a bit. It's not purely legal.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a tricky issue, just in that it reflects kind of the last few years of some interests and activities of board members that have been a bit challenging for staff to negotiate. At the end of the day, to be clear, of course, this is, as Molly mentioned, there's no legal matter here, so it's a policy decision. I'd say where we've been in this as I get into it, as I think about it and talking with Adrian, is kind of in a gray zone. And what I mean by that, just backing up a bit, during the historic drought, we were trying to communicate with the public through every means we could, of course. And one of the strategies that came out of communications is op-eds. And there was a lot of work with comms, working with the board president and sharing drafts with the full board at the time to communicate essential information in context of this historic event. And in the last few years, it's picked up into kind of a routine practice, at least somewhat routine, in a way where it's not coming as part of the strategic communications of comms, but it's also not necessarily just a personal op-ed. So it's an interesting dynamic that's occurred. And I certainly, there's a free speech element, and, you know, we don't want to get in the way with that. So what we're trying to get to is kind of clarity on there's strategic, at times, probably very infrequent, op-eds from the district that would be authored by the president, prepared in conjunction with Adrian and her team, that would be part of our overall communication strategy to customers. And then we're proposing there'd be an understanding of if that's not the case and there's still interest to do an op-ed, that's fine. It's, you know, an individual op-ed, and it doesn't take or involve district resources or district staff, in part because that's not really fair to the other board members, right? Because this is really coming from one or maybe two board members. So that's just kind of the thinking of trying to get clarity, and also sharing that it's very atypical, certainly throughout the county, but well beyond, to have elected officials prepare op-eds in the frequency and fashion that we're seeing here from our experience. So we just wanted to share that, see if there was you know, interest to provide this sort of clarification or other thoughts on this.
And if I can just quickly point out while you guys are gathering your thoughts, on this slide and in the PowerPoint presentation, the bolded sections are new language and the not bolded are existing.
Well, as somebody who's been part of the problem, perhaps, or not, I don't know. I don't think we can do this. I think as elected members of from the public, we have got to be, I think coordinating and communicating is something we ought to do for absolutely. And I think that's we should do that as part of serving our role as elected representatives of the public. That being said, I think that as elected representatives, we have to be able to communicate freely as we think is, you know, as part of serving our role. So the language, as you had on the previous page, any other media communications are coordinated. I don't think that that is a requirement necessarily fits in, will always fit in all cases. So
I think we agree, Director Schmidt. So the next piece speaks to the individual op-ed or anything else, and an individual would want to do. You can see the bold, you know, near the bottom of that paragraph, shouldn't use district time and resources. So absolutely, we don't want to get in the way, and we couldn't, because there's the Fifth Amendment. Free speech, is that?
First Amendment.
First. Okay. God, I stepped out there right in it. I was doing good till I tried to be too smart. Yeah, but anyway, that's we're just trying to distinguish. Is it part of the strategic comms plan where the whole board is part of it, and comms, you know, really jumps in and helps prepare it and refine it and ensures consistent? Or is it the alternative? Great, you want to do one, but that's not for staff to try and navigate your perspective and the district messaging and that sort of thing.
And I do want to speak to, you know, the use of district resources. And this is a pretty consistent theme. I think that, you know, use of district resources should be for purposes that are serve the district as a whole. And that no one would probably disagree with that. But if it's a, you know, if it's an individual board member who feels strongly about a particular issue and there's advocacy, and we have had a lot of discussion on the use of title with respect to advocacy when we adopted the handbook, Larry remembers, then by all means, that board member should absolutely not be curtailed in speaking to the media, in writing opinion pieces. It's just whether that should be done in conjunction with the use of district resources as opposed to an individual endeavor that they feel strongly about as a single board member, as opposed to working on behalf of a district messaging program, I think. is
Well,
just
Molly,
to
we
try
see
to-
it quite often in terms of, you know, these are my views, or not the views of the district, or some sort of language in there that could be added
Yes.
when you're acting as an individual as opposed to the board.
Absolutely. And that is that's spelled out in the use of title advocacy of non-board approved matters. So that was a provision that already existed. I did add a clarifier both in the contact with media to indicate that, you know, that would be done in individual expressions in accordance with the use of title. And then clarified that in the use of title, which is already pretty extensive and we had a lot of discussion on with the adoption, that if a board member is uncertain as to the official position of the district, then, you know, contact the general manager. And typically it's the board has taken an action, the board has taken a position. Those are things that, you know, I think there isn't, it's clear now where the district position and policy has landed because of that action of the board. Maybe there are times when we're still in the process of development to get to a final approval or, you know, adoption or project that it's not clear yet. So that's why I added that last sentence.
I think it's a little tricky about the use of district resources. I'm in the process at this moment of writing an op-ed to the LA Times about California water management.
Mhm.
It's done. I just haven't sent it to them yet. Are you saying that I should send it to the district or I shouldn't send it to the district? Because if I send it to the district, then you review it.
Please don't.
Don't. Okay. That makes it easier.
You know, Larry, I not to say that, you know, someone wouldn't want to read it. It's just the use of, it's your opinion
That's fine.
that you're sharing, right?
That's
And
cool. Yeah, I just was a little confused about that
okay,
because I completely support what you're doing, at least locally.
got it.
You know, LA Times are a little different, but
Right, it is. Okay. Questions, comments? I'll continue on. All right, we're almost to the end. This section is already in the board handbook. This is just a little bit of a streamline clarification language regarding evaluation of board appointed staff. That's your general manager, general counsel, just to indicate that discussions take place on performance and evaluation in closed session in compliance with the Brown Act. And then we certainly want to update the organizational references to recognize the district's 5 divisions that are listed here. I think there's been some reorganization so that those do need to be updated so they're fully inclusive. And there is a bit of a write-up on each of those that we would propose to make sure is consistent and updated as well. And then next steps. So this is just our first part. We would continue this review and incorporating provisions from board policy number 50 in other sections of the board handbook where appropriate, and it would be similar to what we've walked through today at the next couple of finance and administration committee meetings. And you know, my goal is then, of course, to bring a revised, redlined board handbook that the board could then adopt as its updated guidance document. And I'm, you know, kind of struggling with how to present sort of the red line. It's not a small document. It's not a small endeavor. As you can see, I may bring these next sections the same way that I have, and then also put in a red line of sections 1 and 2, just to sort of get us to the finish line without a huge lift at the end. So that's my thinking, but happy to take input there. Thank you.
Great. Matt, any comments?
No, appreciate the effort to clean this up and support the consolidation of, I want to make sure I say it right, policy number 50 into the book. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'll just say ditto. It's got the right policies. I'm glad we're cleaning this up. Let's do it.
Okay, thank you. I'm good. All right.
Thank you.
Yep, appreciate it. Any public comment on this item?
There are none.
Great. Well, that was for information only, but we have given guidance for next steps. So thank you, Molly and Ben and team. And then we'll move on for upcoming meetings, please.
The next Finance and Administration Committee meeting / special meeting of the Board of Directors is on Thursday, September 26th.
Great. All set. Thank you. We are, yes. Yeah, we are adjourned. Thank you.